With budgets tightening and a recession predicted to dominate the economic outlook in 2023, IT is under more pressure than ever to deliver apps and services anytime, anywhere, while keeping devices and data secure. As part of Cybersecurity Month, today I'm joined by Sean Deuby and Jim Doggett from Semperis to discuss how IT organizations can budget for operational resilience in the coming year. So, hi, Jim and Sean. Thanks for taking the time today.
Hi, Russell.
We're talking about obviously operational resilience, and there are various threats that might interrupt operations. But how has that changed over the last kind of 10 or 12 years? I guess there must have been quite a massive change in terms of the kinds of threats that organizations face today.
Yeah, the way I look at it is at its core is the threat to operations that we see today in terms of threat actors, in terms of malware and ransomware, is that it's not geolocated anymore. Traditionally, disasters were very geographic. Tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, and that's why we have data centers in multiple locations. But the kind of threats that we're seeing now are network centric, and they can spread across a network and destroy computer systems across a worldwide network in a matter of minutes. So that takes a fundamental change in the way we approach operational resilience to what it might have been 10 years ago, as you say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Jim, I suppose that the way that we work has changed so much over the last couple of years with COVID, with remote work and hybrid work, and I guess that has put further pressure and strain on operations.
Well, certainly, it's required us to change with having more people working remotely. It requires a change in the whole way our topology of our network is designed. All of a sudden, you've got people coming in from the outside into the wanting to come in as opposed to already being within the network. So, from a security perspective, it means our borders are now much bigger. Our borders are not the network or the physical building. Our borders now tend to be the entire world, which makes it a much more difficult from a security perspective to make sure that something doesn't impact the operations on a daily basis.
Sure. Let's say next year, 2023, let's say there were one or two projects that IT has to adopt, they're non-negotiable. What would you say they should be?
I guess I can go first on this one.
Okay.
And obviously, I'm going to take a security slant on this. And I generally on this, I'll focus on four things I'll say. One, of doing the basics of security well, as we've always said, we've got to patch and we've got to change passwords and all of that. But new, I think, privileged access management, making sure you take care of those accounts that are the most important, using multi-factor authentication cuts the probability of a bad actor coming in and doing something nefarious, probably 90%. So always a good thing to do. And the last is you've got to pay attention to your security infrastructure. Things like Active Directory, I think people typically just assume work, but then you have to ask the question, if Active Directory is or this infrastructure is down, what part of operations does it affect? And generally in today's world, it's everything.
One of the things we're seeing for operational resilience is, as you say, are these attacks and way it affects the infrastructure. And for example, when you're in a time of limited budget, you look to free tools. Semperis has a product called Purple Knight that is a free tool to evaluate the security of your Active Directory, because really, and I think this is a trend that we're seeing, is that there are many areas of infrastructure and operations that are becoming closely tied in with security, because they're realizing that IT infrastructure is a core element of modern security. And so without that, you're going to end up, it doesn't matter. You won't have functioning IT security. So free tools like Purple Knight and evaluate what is in many organizations we found to be a gaping hole in security, to close that up.
Are you seeing organizations want to move towards a zero trust posture? Because that's quite difficult to achieve, isn't it?
Certainly, zero trust is. I mean, it's easier to achieve with cloud service providers such as Azure Active Directory and cloud applications. On premises is a whole different story, where we're talking about typically in organizations that have been around years and years of technical debt. But at the same time, what we see is that it is so much of what we're the zero trust journey that organizations are on are based on the veracity, the reliability of their identity systems. If you can't rely on your identity systems, then the whole zero trust thing falls apart. Very old saying, but I think it applies now more than ever, is that threat actors don't break in, they log in.
Yep. Yep, sure. And just going back to what Jim said about, in principle, there's no such thing as zero trust. I always used to say to people, there's no such thing as 100% secure. But of course, you can be more secure. But 100% security, maybe, as in zero trust, doesn't really exist. But anyway, moving on to the next question. So imagine you've got IT operations on one side, you've got the Chief Information Security Officer on the other. Of course, they're both concerned about this idea of operational resilience. But how might they approach addressing these or this goal of resilience in different ways? So how does each view the risk, the costs, the efficiency, the workloads, and the skills that are required? Of course, we have this big problem with skill shortages in today's economy.
Yeah, yes, from my perspective, historically, I think that there's been a good tension between the infrastructure teams and the security teams. And a few examples may help. One is, as a security person, I want to patch things very quickly so that a risk isn't done. To an IT person, patching is a risk that could shut down a system. So that's one example. Another example, I want to put in this new security like a data loss prevention or some endpoint security, something that might also, from an infrastructure perspective, impact the network. In other words, it might put more strain on the network, and again, increasing the odds that something might not work. So historically, I think we've had some contention. At least I've gone through that many times. I think today, with the advent of ransomware and some of the others, we've come a whole lot closer together now. And I think we actually are starting to talk more and negotiate more and come up with what's the right answer for the company from a risk perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. There's nothing focuses the mind like reading other companies where their entire IT infrastructure has been crippled by a malware attack. To get security and I&O, infrastructure and operations, to think together. To Jim's point about the operational changes, security, it's a continuum. And actually, to take a page out of Jim's book, the fully secure system is one that has been unplugged from everything, but it does not serve the business.
Yeah.
So that's.
Yeah, I'm actually starting to like Sean a bit now.
Right, exactly. So, but on the other side, from the IT point of view, what you want to do is to minimize the friction of people getting their job done, so that operations can continue to run smoothly.
And I've always been big on removing administrator rights from end users, but we all know that without additional tools to help manage that, it's very hard just to take away those rights and allow people to continue doing the things that they need to do.
From a security perspective, that is it's at the top of almost everyone's list. You have to take away admin rights, because if you don't, the endpoint is the entry point for virtually all attacks. They gain, and it's like you said earlier, Sean, they log in, they don't steal, or they don't break in. And if you don't have good endpoint protection, typically it makes it a lot easier, because you can do things like turn off security, you can turn off locking, you can turn off encryption, You can do all those kinds of things if you don't protect them a bit. So I would agree with you.
So could you identify some weak areas in the security posture of most organizations and how they could improve overall security? And I guess Purple Knight would help to identify those things.
Right. And if it comes down to the stuff that we've been saying for so many years, which are some of the security basics. What Purple Knight helps an organization do is not only point out what security changes need to be made, it also prioritizes them. It also gives you the level of effort that's needed to do. How difficult are some of these changes to be made? Or if a vulnerability is pointed out and you're not sure what it is, it contains references to the vulnerability, how to remediate it, where does the vulnerability fit in the MITRE attack framework, and as importantly as anything else, and this is from a security and from an I&O viewpoint, it gives you a detailed report, a very friendly report that talks about your scorecard, essentially, where you are and whether you have critical vulnerabilities that need to be remediated right away, and other ones that are vulnerabilities that should be worked on. There are certain, one of the aspects of Active Directory, having been around for 22 years, is that it's accumulated all sorts of, the attack surface has only grown as that's 22 years of changes that have been made. Maybe some of them were made because of expediency, not because they're perfect, because let's face it, IT administrators have always been very, very busy. So this can point out some of the classic issues of too many administrators or issues that are not nearly as well known.
But how do we persuade the stakeholders that, because, security, it's always, in my mind, it always seems to be like trying to sell an insurance policy. Now, are there any kind of tactics or techniques that you might offer as how that we can really make this real for people and why they should, how we can persuade them to take it more seriously, if that makes sense?
Well, again, I think our own historical from a security perspective, I think security professionals have always sold the fear, uncertainty, and doubt kind of thing, where we've threatened, if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen. We've probably used that a little too much. So in today's world, I think you have to sort of step back. If your goal is to make progress on your infrastructure of identity systems, you've got to prioritize it using risk-based methodologies. So in other words, you've got to demonstrate that from a risk perspective to the company, not to IT, to infrastructure, but to the company, that this is a priority that really falls at the top of that. And you have to approach it from a risk perspective, saying, this is more important than that right now, or here are the consequences of what could happen. You can deal, and obviously show examples are always good. They like to hear. But I think that's the way you've got to start anyway.
Yep, that makes good sense. Okay, so just one more question, and we'll finish up. So, what are some of the steps that either IT operations or other business leaders can take to, build a strategy really for operational resistance in 2023, considering the economic challenges that we're all going to be facing?
To me, it just comes down to, within my operations of security, how do I prioritize things? If I choose to prioritize something higher, such as making sure that an event doesn't happen from a security perspective that could put me out of business or put the company out of business, versus something that's a pain. In the past, we worried so much about someone steals records and we have to notify them, we have to give them free credit reporting and all that. Still terribly important. We don't want to violate privacy principles. However, going out of business or shutting down the whole business is a much probably greater impact and might require a higher priority this year. So that's the way I would attack this. And I would say we've got to think about things like our security identity infrastructure and actually figure out what steps do we take to reduce the likelihood that we're going to have a catastrophic event there.
Yeah, I believe that IT and security, which have been historically siloed from each other. I used to long joke is that, basically security created action items for IT and never executed their own action items. They just gave IT things to do. But but given the situation, and to go back to what Jim was saying about doing a risk analysis, if you look at the risk to continued smooth operations, operational resilience, the highest risk out there is malware attacks. And so what this says to me is that a very high focus for IT is specifically how to defend against that.
So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jim and Sean. If you're interested to find out more about Semperis and Purple Knight, then I'm going to put some links in the video description below. But I'm going to leave you with another video about how one organization used the free Purple Knight tool to improve their security. But that's it from me today, and I'll see you next time.